Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. A commission investigating a Russian influence on Poland's internal security has concluded that the country's efforts to counter disinformation have been inadequate. The report focused on the growing threat posed by Russian tactics to destabilize Poland and other Central European nations, particularly since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. These efforts, the Commission said, are designed to undermine Poland's political stability and its relationships within NATO. One of the key findings of the report is that efforts to counter disinformation threats from Russia and Belarus have been insufficient, temporary, inconsistent, and often merely superficial in recent years. What does Poland need to do to protect against this long-standing and well-financed threat? Well, to answer that question, I am joined by Artur Koldomasov. He's Detector Media, Institute of Global Governance. Mr. Koldomasov, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure, sir. So let's start with some definitions. Can you tell us what disinformation is and how it differs from misinformation?
Well, if we talk by simple words, misinformation is something that has been made on accident without any harmful intention. Meanwhile, disinformation is a specifically harmful action most of the time. The main complication in the modern world is that disinformation can have so many different shapes and forms. And at the same time, sometimes people can confuse misinformation and disinformation because sometimes it's not that easy to tell whether these actions that we are talking about in that specific context are having any harmful intentions or were made by accident. But whenever the line is clear, the distinction between disinformation and misinformation can definitely be made.
Understood. Well, we're talking about Russia and Belarus and their efforts in Poland and the region and, of course, the wider West. And so I think we can safely assume it's disinformation. In other words, they know what they're doing. Now, you know, this has been going on for a number of years, disinformation efforts from Russia and Belarus. In fact, I mentioned COVID-19 in 2020, 5 years ago. And still it seems from this report that Poland was unprepared. Does that surprise you?
That does not surprise me at all, despite the fact that actually disinformation by Russia dates back even to the times of the Cold War, because one of the integral parts of the strategy of the Soviet Union for the Cold War was basically meddling with information, muddying the waters in the Western countries for the Soviet favor. Now we see that being played out just by different methods because the world and the way we approach and consume information have changed. If we talk about the preparedness and that context for various countries, not only for Poland, for instance, unfortunately, there are still people in the security spectrum specifically who still think that disinformation is not as serious enough of a threat, and they don't pay that much attention to that in comparison, for example, with some so-called hard security issues. However, the modern warfare is very technologically leaning, and it's very much leaning into the hybrid warfare. And hybrid warfare most of the time is much cheaper and even at times more efficient than just weapons that we usually see currently. And that is why it is so easy to miss that, and that is also why it's so easy for Russia to use it and to pump a lot of money into that. Therefore, we need to finally consider disinformation as a serious threat and not leave it on the sidelines of the decision making, but actually having some practical, concrete approaches to it that help actually address the root causes of the problem, and not only some superficial methods of dealing with any particular pieces of disinformation, because it requires the very systemic approach.
Understood. Now, intuitively, we understand that this disinformation is intended to divide societies, opinions, and so on. But do we have any metrics against which we can say, yep, this tells us this is working or it's not working very well?
Despite having a lot of difficulty with determining these exact metrics, we can definitely say that the division between different social groups in Europe and in North America, in their countries, and also widening and deepening the gap between different groups in these societies, basically making the polarization there worse, is definitely one of the main targets of the Russian disinformation, because despite the common stereotype, it can feature materials basically addressing very different target audiences with very different perceptions of one issue. And this is one of the indicators that show that basically this is one of the main targets in that context. Because, for example, if we take the Russian disinformation in Polish, for instance, when we look at the network of the Telegram channels that are made and basically operate in Polish language there, they usually don't support any political figure. They usually promote the messaging that all politicians in Poland are wrong, and the better alternative for the Western global order is the Russian global order. And basically, we can see it in many countries, in many different ways, in many different subtle and at the same time harsher ways. And that's why we need to watch out even for something as vague and silly as, for example, some conspiracy theories or some songs based on the Soviet songs made in Russian with some German lyrics, for example, because there were cases like these. Or, for example, some YouTube videos that are very innocent on the first site, but actually they promote the pro-Russian agenda. Like, for example, the YouTube videos in English about what is life in Russia looking like after the sanctions, or just a typical display of, some small town in Russia or something like that. So this can have so many ways, so many different methods to be spread out, actually. And that is why it's so difficult to work with that, because there are also cases when even basically those people who are creating many fakes as integral parts of many disinformation campaigns, they do some fakes, they create them on purpose to be debunked so they can be spread out with the debunking efforts. So now the debunking NGOs and different experts are also more careful about what to debunk and what not to debunk, not to bring something harmful to the informational space of the country that has not been intended to be there.
Understood. Now, we don't have very long left. There's so many more things I'd like to ask you, but there's one thing in particular that additional thing that this report identified. And it said that action against people that have been identified in spreading disinformation is very rarely taken. And I was wondering, is this what happened with Judge Thomas Schmidt, who fled to Belarus? Did he sort of, intend to get away from the risk of being charged with some kind of disinformation-related crime?
Unfortunately, many times, not only in the Polish case, but also in the case of other European countries and also in the United States and Canada, most of the time, the efforts of the analytics and experts in the field are undermined by some political intentions, by some other contexts, and also due to lack of basically seriousness from the relevant authorities who could execute these decisions and these actions. Therefore, that threat of disinformation needs to be taken seriously, finally, not something on the sidelines. For example, we have the country of Latvia, who is being at the forefront of the fight against disinformation among the EU countries, the country that has implemented real criminal charges against disinformation.
What about technically speaking? What about technically speaking? Are there things that can be done technically to sift out this disinformation? For example, can algorithms be adjusted to pick them up and, chuck them in the spam bin, if I can put it like that?
Sure. I mean, the use of algorithms and the use of AI really depends on the intentions of those actors who use it. And basically, those actors can teach these algorithms both to spread disinformation and to debunk it. It has been tested out in many different ways. However, now experts are leaning more towards the strategy of pre-bunking instead of debunking. Pre-bunking means that you should present what is disinformation looking like to the society, and not just presenting it by debunking something that has already been spread out. Also, we should really think about the introduction of the concept of punishment for disinformation to the criminal law of many countries. And we should really show that the freedom of speech really comes with responsibility. And unfortunately, the notion of the freedom of speech has been abused currently by malicious actors, including Russia and Belarusian Lukashenko regime. That is why we need to take this issue seriously, and we need to take these actions.
Indeed. So a complex picture indeed, and we look forward to inviting you back to tell us how things are progressing. Artur Koldomasov, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with our audience. Have a good evening, sir.
Thank you, likewise.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Good night.